The rain drummed a steady rhythm against the window pane, a familiar symphony that echoed through the smoky haze of my office. The neon sign outside flickered intermittently, casting ghostly shadows across the walls. In the corner, a half-smoked cigarette smoldered in an ashtray, its thin tendrils of smoke curling upwards, mingling with the dim light of the desk lamp. I was Jackson Rayne, a detective in a city where the line between truth and darkness often blurred. That night, I found myself staring at a new file on my desk, the edges worn from years of handling. The case had long since gone cold, but the mystery of Jean Spangler's disappearance still lingered in the air like a stubborn fog. On October 9, 1949, a tattered purse was found in a remote area of Griffith Park. It was the only trace left of Jean Spangler, a Hollywood actress and model who had vanished just 2 days prior. The City of Angels, with all its glitz and glamour, had swallowed another soul, leaving behind more questions than answers. It was time to dig into the shadows of Jean Spangler's life, to uncover the secrets hidden beneath the surface. The investigation was just beginning, and the rain-soaked streets of Los Angeles held the clues that could unravel this decades-old mystery. Act 1. The Rising Starlet. Jean Spangler's story began far from the glitter and shine of Hollywood. Born in Seattle, Washington on September 2nd, 1923, Jean Elizabeth Spangler's life took its first fateful turn when her family moved to California. The City of Angels had a way of beckoning those with dreams too big for small-town living, and Jean was no exception. She attended Franklin High School in Los Angeles, where her natural beauty and talent set her apart. Even as a teen, she danced with the Earl Carroll Theater and Florentine Gardens, two places where the stars of tomorrow often found their beginnings. Upon her graduation in 1941, Jean seemed poised for stardom, ready to take on the world. But life had other plans. In 1942, she met Dexter Benner, a manufacturer who swept her off her feet in a whirlwind romance. They married quickly, but the union was far from idyllic. The cracks began to show almost immediately, and Jean soon found herself trapped in a turbulent relationship. She filed for divorce, citing cruelty, but the back and forth with Benner was far from over. In the midst of their troubled marriage, Jean gave birth to their daughter Christine on April 22, 1944. The arrival of her daughter brought joy, but also more strife. The custody battles that ensued were long and bitter, with Benner initially granted custody in 1946. He reportedly denied Jean the right to see her daughter, twisting the knife deeper into an already open wound. By 1948, the courts finally ruled in her favor, allowing Jean to reclaim her daughter and some semblance of peace. Despite the chaos in her personal life, Jean remained determined to break into acting. With her background as a dancer and model, she possessed the poise and charisma that Hollywood demanded. By 1949, she had begun to find her footing, landing bit parts in several films. Her roles were small, but they were stepping stones in her quest for stardom. She danced in uncredited roles in films like Walter Lang's When My Baby Smiles at Me in 1948 and the 1949 comedy Chicken Every Sunday. Each role, no matter how minor, was a testament to her determination and resilience. Her last role would come in the musical drama Young Man with a Horn, released posthumously in 1950. Jean Spangler was on the cusp of something greater, her star beginning to rise just as it was cruelly extinguished. As I sat in my office, the rain tapping persistently against the window, I could almost see her. Young, beautiful, full of dreams. A starlet in the making, caught in the merciless grip of Hollywood's dark side. Jean Spangler's early life was a blend of triumphs and tribulations, each moment leading her inexorably toward her mysterious fate. The journey into her past had only just begun, and already the shadows whispered secrets waiting to be uncovered. Act 2. The Hollywood Disappearance. The night of October 7, 1949 seemed ordinary enough. Jean Spangler, with her effortless grace and charm, left her home on Colgate Avenue in the Park La Brea residential complex. She lived there with her mother Florence, her 5-year-old daughter Christine, her brother Edward, and her sister-in-law Sophie. It was a full house, but Jean was used to navigating through the complexities of her life, both on and off the screen. That evening, she told Sophie she was meeting Dexter Benner, her ex-husband, to discuss a late child support payment. Afterward, she said, she would be heading to a night shoot for a film. Jean seemed in good spirits, asking Sophie how she looked before stepping out the door. "Going to work," she said with a wink, as little Christine asked where her mother was heading. It wasn't unusual for Jean to work late, especially as a bit part extra involved in night shoots. Around 7 p.m., Jean called home to check in, her voice steady as she spoke with Sophie. She asked about Christine and mentioned she would have to work the full 8 hours, implying she might not be back until the morning. It was a familiar routine, one that didn't raise any immediate alarms. But when morning came, Jean had not returned. Sophie, feeling the first twinges of concern, waited a while longer before going to the police. By then, the sun was up, and the reality of Jean's absence began to settle like a heavy fog. She filed a missing person report, and the LAPD began their investigation into the sudden disappearance of a promising starlet. Questions quickly turned to Dexter Benner, the ex-husband Jean was supposedly meeting. Benner claimed he hadn't seen Jean in weeks, a story corroborated by his new wife, Lynn Lasky Benner, whom he had married just a month prior. The alibi seemed solid, but suspicion always finds a way to linger in cases like these. Further inquiries led the police to a saleswoman at the farmer's market, just blocks from Jean's home. She remembered seeing Jean around 6 p.m., browsing casually but appearing to be waiting for someone. It was a lead, but a tenuous one at best. The mystery deepened when the Screen Extras Guild and various TV studios confirmed that Jean had no work scheduled for that night. The trail seemed to grow colder by the hour, each lead fizzling out into a dead end. 2 days after her disappearance on October 9, 1949, a breakthrough of sorts came when Jean's purse was discovered by a Griffith Park employee near the Ferndale entrance. The park, sprawling over 4,107 acres, was a vast and daunting place for a search. The purse's discovery prompted an extensive hunt involving 60 police officers and over 100 volunteers. Yet despite their efforts, no other trace of Jean Spangler was found. Her purse, its straps torn as if it had been ripped from her arm, was the only piece of evidence they had. The purse contained a cryptic note addressed to someone named Kirk, mentioning a doctor. It was a fragment of Jean's life that hinted at secrets no one had known she kept. The police were left with more questions than answers, the shadows deepening around the bright light that was Jean Spangler. As I pieced together the events of that fateful night, I could feel the weight of the unanswered questions pressing in. Jean's disappearance was more than just a missing person case. It was a puzzle with pieces scattered across the darkened landscape of Hollywood. Each clue, each lead, was a step closer to understanding what had happened to the rising starlet who had vanished without a trace. Act 3. The LAPD investigation. The initial investigation into Jean Spangler's disappearance was a maze of dead ends and elusive leads. As the LAPD began their search, I found myself drawn into the case, my instincts pushing me to uncover the truth behind the young starlet's vanishing act. The first step was to question Dexter Benner, the ex-husband Jean had claimed to be meeting that night. Benner's alibi seemed airtight. He insisted he hadn't seen Jean for weeks, a story backed up by his new wife, Lynn Lasky Benner. She confirmed their whereabouts, painting a picture of domestic bliss that was hard to crack. But my gut told me there was more to this story. The ex-husband always warranted a closer look. I pored over the notes from the interview, searching for inconsistencies, but the Banner's story held firm. Still, something about it didn't sit right. The LAPD seemed to feel the same way, but without more evidence, there was little to go on. The next lead came from a saleswoman at the farmer's market, not far from Jean's home. She recalled seeing Jean around 6 p.m., browsing the stalls but appearing to wait for someone. It was a small detail, but in cases like these, small details could mean everything. I made a note to visit the market myself, to see if I could pick up on anything the initial investigation might have missed. Then came the verification with the Screen Extras Guild and various TV studios. They confirmed that Jean had no work scheduled for that night. This was a crucial piece of the puzzle. If Jean wasn't heading to a film set, where was she going? The more I dug, the more I felt the weight of her secrets pressing down on me. 2 days after Jean's disappearance, a Griffith Park employee found her purse near the Ferndale entrance. The discovery of the purse marked a turning point in the investigation. I remember heading to the park that day, the scene buzzing with activity. 60 police officers and over 100 volunteers combed through the vast, rugged terrain, hoping to find any trace of Jean. The purse was a chilling find. Its straps were torn, as if it had been forcibly taken from her. Inside, a cryptic note addressed to someone named Kirk mentioned a doctor, hinting at secrets and meetings unknown to her family and friends. The note was a fragment of a life hidden beneath the surface, and it was my job to piece it together. Theories and suspicions swirled around Benner's involvement. He had the motive, custody of their daughter Christine, and the opportunity. But as much as I wanted to pin it on him, the evidence was thin. The LAPD couldn't hold him without more concrete proof, and he seemed to slip through our fingers like sand. I stood in Griffith Park, the purse in my hand, and looked around at the sprawling wilderness. It was easy to hide something out here, easy for secrets to get lost in the underbrush. But I wasn't ready to give up. Jean Spangler's story deserved an ending, and I was determined to find it. The investigation was far from over. Each lead, each piece of evidence, brought me closer to the truth. But the shadows around Jean's life were deep, and I knew it would take all my skills to bring them into the light. The city had a way of swallowing its secrets, but this time, I was determined to fight back. Act 4. The Mysterious Dr. Scott. The note found in Jean Spangler's purse was a tantalizing clue, a fragment of her life that hinted at deeper secrets. It was addressed to someone named Kirk and mentioned a Dr. Scott. The note read, "Kirk, can't wait any longer, going to see Dr. Scott. It will work best this way while Mother is away." The sentence ended abruptly, as if Jean had been interrupted before she could finish. It was my job to uncover the identities behind these names and what they meant for Jean's disappearance. I sat at my desk, the note spread out before me. The rain outside provided a steady backdrop as I pondered the possibilities. Who was Kirk? And who was this Dr. Scott? The names were common enough, but the context suggested something more clandestine. I knew I had to dig deeper. The first step was to search through Jean's known associates and contacts. The police had already questioned her family and friends, but no one recognized the names. It was as if Kirk and Dr. Scott were phantoms, shadows flitting at the edges of Jean's life. The LAPD had scoured the city, questioning every doctor with the last name Scott, but came up empty-handed. No one had a patient by the name of Spangler or Benner, her married name. I started by revisiting the last known sightings of Jean, the farmer's market, where she had been seen waiting for someone, and the various nightclubs she frequented. These were places where she could have met someone under the radar, someone who didn't want their name known. The club scene in Hollywood was filled with people living double lives, hiding secrets behind glamorous facades. One potential lead was a man Jean had once been involved with during the war, an Army Air Corps lieutenant she called Scotty. He had been abusive, and she had told friends he threatened her when she left him. But according to her lawyer, she hadn't seen Scotty since 1945. Was it possible he had come back into her life? Or was this just a dead end? The more I searched, the more elusive the answers became. Speculation was rife. Some believed Kirk might be a Hollywood figure, given Jean's recent work in films. There was talk of Kirk Douglas, the famous actor. Jean had just finished a bit part in Young Man with a Horn, a film starring Douglas. The connection seemed tenuous but worth exploring. I reached out to Douglas, who was vacationing in Palm Springs. Over the phone, he denied knowing Jean beyond their brief interaction on set. He later issued a public statement, reiterating that he had never been out with her. With every avenue I pursued, the shadows around Dr. Scott grew darker. Whoever this person was, They had gone to great lengths to remain hidden. The note suggested urgency and secrecy, hinting at a planned meeting that never came to pass. It was clear that finding Dr. Scott was crucial to understanding what had happened to Jean. As I sifted through the details, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. The note, the mysterious names, the torn purse, it all pointed to a life tangled in secrets. The challenge was to untangle those threads, to follow them back to their source. Jean Spangler had left a trail, however faint, and it was my job to follow it to the end. Act 5. The Hollywood film star. Hollywood was a place where dreams were made, but it was also a city where secrets festered just beneath the glittering surface. Jean Spangler's life had intersected with many of its denizens, and among them was the legendary Kirk Douglas. The note in her purse had mentioned a Kirk, and public speculation quickly turned to Douglas. His denial was swift and firm, stating that he had only briefly interacted with John on the set of Young Man with a Horn. Despite his high profile, there was nothing concrete to tie him to her disappearance, and the trail seemed to end there. But Hollywood's secrets ran deeper than casual denials. Jean had led a life filled with complex relationships and fleeting romances. Friends recalled her mentioning a casual affair she was enjoying, without ever revealing the man's identity. Actor Robert Cummings, a friend of Jean's, remembered her telling him, "I'm having the time of my life." It seemed Jean was adept at keeping her personal life compartmentalized, sharing only what she chose to with each circle of acquaintances. As I delved further into her past, the shadowy figure of Doc emerged. This was no ordinary doctor, but rather a former medical student known for performing illegal abortions, a dangerous and clandestine profession in those days. Jean's friends confided to the police that she had mentioned being 3 months pregnant and was considering an abortion. This was a lead that couldn't be ignored. The LAPD had scoured the city, trying to trace this Doc, but he remained elusive. He was a ghost, whispered about in the dark corners of nightclubs and back alleys, but never seen. Witnesses claimed he operated in the shadows, providing services to those desperate enough to seek them out. The police's inability to locate him only deepened the mystery. Abortion was a perilous business in the 1940s, illegal and fraught with danger. Women who sought these procedures often faced dire consequences, both from botched operations and from the legal ramifications. The theory that Jean had sought an abortion gone wrong was plausible, especially given the torn purse and the abruptness of her disappearance. Yet without a name or a face, Doc remained an enigma. As I pieced together these fragments, a picture began to form of a woman trapped by her circumstances. Jean was balancing her aspirations with the harsh realities of her personal life. The custody battles with her ex-husband, her struggle to make it in Hollywood, and her secret relationships all painted a portrait of a life lived on the edge. I revisited the farmer's market and the nightclub she frequented, talking to anyone who might have seen her or known her habits. There was a sense of camaraderie among those who worked in Hollywood's underbelly, but also a wall of silence when it came to matters as sensitive as illegal abortions. The name Doc elicited fear and reluctance, a testament to the danger he represented. The tangled web of Jean's life, her connections to Hollywood's elite, and the underworld figures who operated in the shadows all pointed to a woman whose disappearance was more than a simple case of going missing. It was a story of desperation, secrecy, and the lengths one might go to protect their dreams and their loved ones. As the layers peeled back, the path grew darker, leading me to question every assumption and revisit every clue. Jean Spangler's life was a riddle, and the more I uncovered, the more complex it became. Act 6. The Black Dahlia Connection. The disappearance of Jean Spangler was already a complex case, but the shadow of another infamous crime loomed large over it: the brutal murder of Elizabeth Short, better known as the Black Dahlia. The grotesque nature of Short's killing and the media frenzy that followed had left an indelible mark on Los Angeles, and the city was still reeling from its unsolved mysteries. Speculation began to swirl about a possible connection between Spangler's disappearance and the Black Dahlia murder. Both women were aspiring actresses, both had ties to Hollywood, and both vanished under suspicious circumstances. It was a connection that couldn't be ignored, and it added another layer of darkness to an already murky investigation. Detective Rick Jackson of the LAPD had taken a particular interest in the case. His years on the force had given him a keen sense for patterns and connections that others might miss. Jackson saw similarities between the two cases that suggested more than just a coincidence. The lack of a formal case file on Spangler's disappearance didn't deter him. He kept a notebook filled with documents related to her case, driven by a hunch that the two crimes were somehow linked. One theory that gained traction was put forward by Steve Hodel, a former LAPD detective and the son of Dr. George Hodel. Steve Hodel believed that his father, a man with a dark and sinister reputation, was responsible for the murder of Elizabeth Short, as well as several other unsolved murders, including Jean Spangler's disappearance. Dr. George Hodel was no ordinary suspect. He was a prominent physician in Los Angeles, but his private life was shrouded in darkness. Steve Hodel's book, Black Dahlia Avenger, laid out a compelling case against his father, suggesting that he had not only killed Elizabeth Short, but was also involved in the murders of Jean French, Gladys Kern, and potentially Jean Spangler. One of the most chilling pieces of evidence in Hodel's theory was the proximity of Spangler's purse to his father's residence, the Franklin House in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. The house itself was a sinister structure, designed by architect Lloyd Wright, and had a reputation for strange happenings. Steve Hodel recalled his half-brother Duncan mentioning a drop-dead gorgeous actress named Jean, whom their father had been dating. It all seemed to fit into a macabre puzzle. The LAPD had never officially linked George Hodel to Spangler's disappearance, but the theory was hard to dismiss. Dr. Hodel had been arrested in 1949 on charges of molesting and impregnating his 14-year-old daughter, Tamar. Tamar's subsequent back-alley abortion and the charges against her father painted a picture of a man capable of horrific deeds. I couldn't ignore the connections. The descriptions of a man seen with Spangler on the night she disappeared matched George Hodel's profile. The 1936 black Packard sedan that witnesses saw also matched vehicles seen leaving the scene of the Black Dahlia murder. It was a chilling thought that the same man might be responsible for both crimes, operating with impunity in a city blinded by its own glamour. As I dug deeper into Hodel's theory, I found myself standing outside the Franklin House, its imposing facade casting long shadows in the late afternoon light. The house was a monument to secrets, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it held the answers to questions that had haunted Los Angeles for decades. Steve Hodel's pursuit of the truth about his father had led him to some dark places, and now I was following in his footsteps. The search for forensic evidence in 2012 had turned up traces of human remains in the soil around the house, adding weight to the theory that Dr. Hodel had been involved in more than just one murder. The connection to the Black Dahlia murder was more than just a theory. It was a thread that linked two of the city's most haunting mysteries. Jean Spangler's disappearance, like Elizabeth Short's murder, was a testament to the darkness that lurked beneath Hollywood's bright lights. Act 7. The Mob Connection. Hollywood wasn't just a land of glitz and glamour. It was also a battleground for power and control, with organized crime pulling many of the strings behind the scenes. As I dug deeper into Jean Spangler's life, the threads began to lead me toward the dark world of the Los Angeles underworld, where gangsters like Mickey Cohen held sway. Jean Spangler's connections to this shadowy world were tenuous but tantalizing. She had worked as a dancer at Florentine Gardens, a nightclub owned by Mark Hansen and Niels Thor Granlund. Hansen was not just a nightclub owner. He had ties to some of the most notorious figures in Los Angeles, including being a suspect in the infamous Black Dahlia murder. It was said that he was the last person to speak with Elizabeth Short before her brutal death. Hansen's link to Spangler might have been through her work at Florentine Gardens, but the connections didn't end there. Jean was known to have brushed shoulders with various mob affiliates, including Anthony Cornero Strala, a bootlegger and gambling entrepreneur, and more ominously, Mickey Cohen. Cohen was a violent gangster who had worked under Al Capone's Chicago outfit and later established his own criminal empire in Los Angeles. Rumors swirled that Spangler had been seen with Little Davy Ogle, one of Cohen's associates, in places like Palm Springs and Las Vegas. These were more than just casual sightings. They suggested a deeper involvement with the mob. Ogle was under indictment for conspiracy, and his disappearance on October 9, 1949, coincidentally the same day Spangler's purse was found, only added to the intrigue. Another associate, Frank Nicolai, had also vanished around the same time, having been indicted on similar charges. These disappearances hinted at a cleanup operation, a methodical erasure of loose ends that could point back to Cohen's operations. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jean Spangler had known too much or had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Testimonies from various sources suggested that Spangler might have been caught up in something far more dangerous than a casual affair. Thomas Ellery Evans, a known gangster and acquaintance of Ogle, was interrogated by the police. But like so many in this murky world, he maintained a wall of silence. The code of the streets was unyielding, and breaking it often meant a one-way ticket to an unmarked grave. In April 1950, Spangler's sister Betsy testified that neither she nor Jean had any known connections to Ogle, Cohen, or any of their associates. Yet, a customs agent in El Paso, Texas, reported seeing Ogle and a woman resembling Spangler at a local hotel. The clerk identified her from a photograph, but their names were absent from the register, leaving another dead end in a case filled with them. As I pieced together these mob connections, the image of Jean Spangler grew more complex. She was a woman living on the edge, her life intersecting with some of the most dangerous men in Los Angeles. Theories abounded. Was she involved in something illicit, perhaps unknowingly? Was she a pawn in a larger game of power and control? Or was she simply a woman who had made the wrong acquaintances? The mob connection added a layer of peril to the investigation. Mickey Cohen and his associates were not men to be trifled with, and digging into their affairs was akin to opening Pandora's box. Yet, the truth about Jean Spangler lay somewhere within this tangled web of crime and deception. As I stared at the names and faces in my notes, the rain finally began to let up outside, leaving the city in a damp, misty haze. The fog of uncertainty around Jean's disappearance remained thick, but each piece of the puzzle brought me closer to the heart of the mystery. Jean Spangler's story was a testament to the dangers lurking beneath Hollywood's veneer, a reminder that the city of dreams was also a city of nightmares.